Hey, tonight we're going to travel back to one of the toughest jobs in Victorian England. Imagine waking up in the dead of night, working in sweltering heat with coal dust filling your lungs and kneading massive amounts of dough with your bare hands until your back feels like it might snap. This is the story of Thomas Barrow, a baker in the industrial heart of 1870s Birmingham during a time when baking was literally a deadly profession. You'll feel the heat of the coal-fired ovens against your skin, taste the grit of Victorian city air, and experience both the struggles and small triumphs of the people who made the bread that fed a nation. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Now, find a cozy spot, take a slow, deep breath, and let your body sink into comfort as we journey back in time together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Birmingham, England in 1872. The clock on the wall reads 10:30 in the evening, but for you, the day is just beginning. Your name is Thomas Barrow and you're a journeyman baker, one of the 14,000 men who work through the night to feed Victorian Britain's growing cities. Your eyes open to darkness. The small room you rent is cold. The fire went out hours ago, and you can feel the chill seeping through the thin blanket draped over your body. Your back aches from yesterday's shift, and your fingers are cracked and dry from handling flour all night. Outside, rain patters against the window, and somewhere in the distance you hear the whistle of a late-night train. Good news. You have steady work at Middleton's bakery. Bad news. You're heading into another 18-hour shift in conditions that would be illegal in your world. As you swing your legs over the edge of your narrow bed, your feet touch the cold wooden floor. A single candle illuminates your sparse belongings, a change of clothes, a worn Bible, and a small photograph of the countryside where you grew up, before the factories came, before the smoke, before Britain transformed into the world's first urban economy. You dress quickly in the dim light, pulling on a rough cotton shirt and trousers that still smell faintly of yesterday's coal dust and sweat. There's no time for breakfast. Your stomach growls, but you've grown used to the hunger. Besides, there will be scraps at the bakery, the broken edges of loaves, maybe even a piece of fancy bread if you're lucky. The streets of Birmingham are dark and mostly empty as you make your way to work. Gas lamps cast pools of yellow light on the wet cobblestones, and your boots splash through puddles as you hurry along. The air smells of coal smoke and the lingering stench from the open sewers. Britain's industrial revolution is in full swing, and the price of progress is paid in soot-stained buildings and blackened lungs. You pass a group of men stumbling out of a pub, their laughter echoing in the quiet street. They've finished their day's work while yours is just beginning. A twinge of envy passes through you, but you push it aside. At least you have work. At least you're not in the workhouse like so many others who couldn't find employment in the crowded city. The bakery is a small building tucked between a cobbler's shop and a butcher's. When you push open the door, a wave of heat hits you. The ovens have already been lit. The foreman, Mr. Simmons, looks up from where he's setting the sponge. The pre-dough that's been fermenting since earlier in the day. "You're late, Barrow," he says, though you're not. His face is ruddy from the heat, his thick moustache flecked with grey. At 50, he's ancient for a baker. Most don't live past 42. "Sorry, sir," you mutter, hanging your coat on a hook by the door. No use arguing. Simmons has been working in bakeries since he was 12, and the decades of night shifts and coal dust have made him perpetually irritable. The bakehouse is small, not much bigger than the rural bakeries of your childhood. A massive brick oven dominates one wall, its mouth glowing orange from the coal fire within. The heat it gives off is intense, making sweat immediately bead on your forehead, despite the cool night outside. The kneading trough sits in the centre of the room, a wooden vessel large enough to hold dough for nearly 100 loaves. Two other men are already at work. John is about your age, 25, with arms like tree trunks from years of kneading dough. He gives you a nod as you enter. The other is a boy of maybe 14, skinny and pale, sweeping coal dust from the floor. He doesn't look up. He's the fourth hand, the lowest in the bakery hierarchy. His job is to shovel coal, clean and make deliveries. In a few years, if he survives, he might work his way up to your position. 20 stone of flour tonight, Simmons says, pointing to the massive sacks stacked against the wall. Each weighs 280 pounds, enough to make nearly 100 loaves. And the fancy rolls for morning. The middle-class clerks want their breakfast. Your shoulders slump slightly at the mention of the fancy rolls. They're more work, requiring extra care and ingredients, but they're what the growing middle class demands. A small luxury to start their day as they head to offices and counting houses. "Yes, sir," you say, and move to the sink to wash your hands. The water is cold, and it stings the small cuts on your fingers, badges of your trade. The work begins as it always does, with the mixing of the dough. John heaves one of the massive sacks onto the edge of the trough, and together you tip it in. The flour billows up in a cloud that coats your face and clothes and finds its way into your lungs, making you cough. You can taste it, dry and powdery on your tongue. Water is added next, then the sponge that Simmons prepared earlier. The real work is about to begin. You and John plunge your arms into the mixture, feeling the cold, sticky mass cling to your skin. Then you begin to knead. Kneading 20 stone of dough is a brutal task. You push with your palms, fold with your fingers, push again. The muscles in your arms and back scream in protest, but you can't stop. If the dough isn't properly kneaded, the bread won't rise correctly, and Simmons will dock your pay, money you can't afford to lose. Sweat pours down your face and back, soaking your shirt. The air in the bakehouse is thick with flour dust and coal smoke, making each breath a struggle. Your lungs burn and you cough, bringing up phlegm-tinged grey with coal dust. This is why bakers die young. This is why, of 111 bakers examined in one study, 108 were found to be suffering from lung disease. The heat is relentless. The coal fire burns hot to keep the ovens at the right temperature, and the small bakehouse traps the warmth. It must be 90 degrees at least, and it's still the middle of winter outside. In summer, it becomes nearly unbearable. After an hour of kneading, your arms feel like lead, and your back is a knot of pain. But the dough is finally ready, smooth and elastic under your hands. You step back, wiping sweat from your forehead with your sleeve, leaving a streak of flour across your face. "Rest now," Simmons says. "Dough needs to prove." This is the one small mercy of the night, a brief period of rest while the dough rises. In the corner of the bakehouse is a makeshift bed, a flour sack stretched over the lid of the kneading trough. It's not comfort by any measure, but it's a chance to close your eyes for an hour or two. You collapse onto this rough bed, too exhausted to care about the hard surface or the heat or the flour dust that fills your nostrils. John takes his place on the floor nearby, using his folded jacket as a pillow. The boy continues sweeping, occasionally adding coal to the fire to maintain the temperature. Sleep comes quickly, but is no less shallow. The bakehouse never truly quiets. There's the crackle of the fire, the occasional instruction from Simmons, the sound of the boy's broom against the stone floor. But your body, desperate for rest, takes what it can get. You dream of green fields and clean air, of the small village where you were born, before your father lost his farm and moved the family to Birmingham in search of work, before he died in a factory accident, leaving you to support your mother and younger sisters. In your dream, the sun is warm on your face, and the air smells of grass and wildflowers instead of coal and sweat. The dream shatters when Simmons shakes you awake. "Up now," he growls. "Dough's ready." Your body protests as you drag yourself upright. Even that brief rest has allowed your muscles to stiffen, and pain shoots through your back as you stand. But there's no time for complaints. The night is only half over, and there's much work still to be done. The dough has risen, doubling in size in the warm bakehouse. Now comes the task of shaping it into loaves. You and John work side by side, cutting chunks from the massive mound, weighing them on the scale, 4 pounds each for the quartern loaves that will feed working families, and then shaping them with practiced hands. Your fingers move almost automatically, folding and tucking the dough, creating the round shapes that will become loaves. The work is rhythmic, almost meditative, and for a brief time you forget the ache in your back and the burn in your lungs. The boy has been busy preparing the oven, raking out the coals to achieve an even heat. Now he stands ready with the long-handled peel, a wooden paddle used to slide the loaves into the oven. One by one, you place the shaped dough onto the peel, and he transfers them into the fiery mouth of the oven. The heat that billows out as the oven door opens is intense, like a physical blow. You step back, feeling your skin tighten and redden. How the boy stands it, you don't know. His young face is permanently flushed from the heat, his eyebrows singed short. With the first batch of loaves in the oven, there's no rest. The fancy rolls need to be prepared. Smaller, richer dough with milk and eggs added. These are for the middle-class customers, the clerks and shopkeepers who can afford a little luxury with their morning tea. The rolls require more delicate handling, more precise shaping, and you find yourself taking extra care despite your fatigue. Pride in your work is one of the few things that can't be taken from you. The night progresses in a rhythm of kneading, shaping, baking, and brief moments of rest that are never quite enough. The clock on the wall moves painfully slowly. Outside, the sky remains dark, though you know dawn must be approaching. The first batch of loaves comes out of the oven. Their crusts golden brown, the smell of fresh bread momentarily overpowering the less pleasant odours of the bakehouse. The boy stacks them on cooling racks, and you feel a small surge of satisfaction at the sight of them. Perfect, even loaves that will feed dozens of families. But there's no time to admire your work. The fancy rolls go in next, and then another batch of loaves. The work is endless, a Sisyphean task that must be completed night after night. At around 5 in the morning, when your arms are trembling with exhaustion and your eyes burn from lack of sleep. The door to the bakehouse opens, letting in a blast of cold air that feels heavenly against your overheated skin. It's Mrs. Middleton, the owner's wife, come to check on the night's production. She's a thin woman with sharp eyes that miss nothing. She walks through the bakehouse, inspecting the loaves, running a critical finger along surfaces to check for cleanliness, despite the impossibility of keeping anything truly clean in the flour-dusted, coal-smoke-filled space. "The Collins family has ordered extra for today," she says to Simmons. "Their daughter's getting married." Simmons nods, but you see the flash of annoyance in his eyes. Extra orders mean extra work, and all of you are already at the limits of your endurance. Mrs. Middleton's gaze falls on you, and her nose wrinkles slightly. You must be a sight, covered in flour and sweat, dark circles under your eyes, hair matted to your head. But there's also a flash of something else in her expression. Pity, perhaps? Or recognition of the toll this work takes on your body? "Make sure the fancy breads are fresh for the morning customers," she says before leaving, the door closing behind her with a finality that traps you back in the heat and the dust. By 6 in the morning, the baking is mostly done. Racks of bread fill the bakehouse, cooling in preparation for the day's sales. But your work isn't finished. The bread needs to be delivered to customers who expect fresh loaves with their breakfast. You and the boy load a hand cart with the still warm bread. The fancy rolls go on top, carefully arranged so they won't be crushed. Then you push the cart out into the streets of Birmingham, which are now coming alive with the early morning activities of a city at the heart of industrial Britain. The air outside is cool and damp, a blessed relief after the inferno of the bakehouse. Dawn is breaking, painting the smoke-stained buildings with a golden light that almost makes them beautiful. Workers are heading to factories, women are queuing at water pumps, and street vendors are setting up their stalls. Your first stop is a row of terraced houses where factory workers live. Women come to the door in dressing gowns, their hair still in nightcaps, to buy the £4 loaves that will feed their families for the day. They hand over their pennies without really looking at you. Just another tradesman making his morning rounds. Next, you visit the larger houses on the outskirts of the industrial district where the foremen and clerks live. Here, it's the fancy rolls they want, still warm from the oven, to be served with butter and jam at breakfast tables set with china and silver. These customers look at you with the vague disinterest of those who have never known true hunger or exhaustion. The sun is fully up by the time you make your last delivery, and your body is screaming for rest. 18 hours have passed since you woke in your cold room, and every muscle aches with a deep, bone-penetrating fatigue. But there's still the cart to return, the bakehouse to clean, and preparations to make for the next night's baking. When you finally trudge back to your lodgings, the city is in full swing. Children are playing in the streets, women are hanging washing on lines strung between buildings, men are at work in factories and workshops. Normal life is happening all around you as you move like a ghost through the daylight world, belonging neither here nor in the darkness where you labour. Your room is no longer cold, the sun has warmed it through the small window, but it offers little comfort. You're too tired to eat, too exhausted even to remove your flour-covered clothes. You collapse onto your bed, feeling the grit of flour between your teeth, the burn of coal dust in your lungs, the deep ache in your muscles that never truly goes away. As sleep begins to claim you, you wonder, as you often do, how long you can continue this life. Most bakers don't see their 50th birthday. Many don't reach 40. The constant night work, the coal dust, the back-breaking labour, it all takes its toll. You've seen men cough blood onto the dough, seen them collapse from heat exhaustion, seen their skin erupt in painful rashes from the constant contact with flour and heat. But what choice do you have? Your mother and sisters depend on your wages. There are no other jobs for a man with your skills, and at least you're not in the workhouse or the poorhouse, those last desperate refugees for those who cannot support themselves. As consciousness fades, one final thought drifts through your mind. Tomorrow night, you'll do it all again, and the night after that. And the night after that, until your body gives out or some new invention makes your labour obsolete. This is the life of a Victorian baker, brutal, relentless and necessary, because no matter how industrial Britain becomes, people still need their daily bread. The weight of sleep presses down on you like a heavy blanket and your breathing deepens. Outside, the sounds of the city continue. Cartwheels on cobblestones, children's shouts, a street vendor's cry, but you hear none of it. For a few precious hours, you escape the heat and the pain and the endless work. You sleep the dreamless sleep of the utterly exhausted, your body slowly recovering for the night to come. And as you sleep, the bread you made feeds the city that is slowly killing you. It's just after 10 in the evening when Thomas wakes again, his body still heavy with exhaustion. The brief hours of daylight sleep were not enough to fully restore him, but they rarely are. He sits up slowly, wincing as his stiff muscles protest. His lungs feel tight, and he coughs, bringing up phlegm darkened by coal dust. The taste in his mouth is bitter, a metallic tang that never fully goes away. Thomas splashes water from the basin onto his face, the shock of cold helping to clear the fog of fatigue. Through the thin walls of his lodging house, he can hear his neighbours, a family of 6 crammed into a room no bigger than his own. The children are crying, hungry probably. Food is expensive in the city, and wages barely cover the necessities. As he dresses, Thomas thinks of his mother and sisters in their small cottage on the edge of town. He sends half his wages to them each week, keeping only what he needs for rent and the simplest meals. It's barely enough for any of them, but what else can he do? In Birmingham, 1872, there are few options for a man with no formal education and only his strong back to offer. Tonight, the air outside is thick with fog, yellow-grey and acrid from the factory smokestacks. It clings to his skin and clothes as he makes his way through the narrow streets toward the bakery. Gas lamps cast eerie halos in the murk, and shadowy figures hurry past, faces wrapped in scarves against the poisonous air. When Thomas arrives at Middleton's bakery, something feels different. Mr. Simmons is already there, as usual, but so is Mr. Middleton himself, a rare sight during the night shift. The bakery owner is a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and the ruddy complexion of someone who enjoys his ale. He's deep in conversation with Simmons, but both men fall silent when Thomas enters. "Ah, Barrow," Middleton says, his voice overly cheerful. "Just the man, reliable as clockwork. Eh, Simmons?" Simmons grunts in what might be agreement. The boy, Jimmy, is already there, sweeping the floor with mechanical movements, his thin shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. John hasn't arrived yet. "Sir," Thomas says, nodding respectfully as he hangs up his coat. Something about Middleton's presence makes him uneasy. The bakery owner rarely shows interest in the night operations unless there's a problem or a change coming. "Difficult times, Barrow," Middleton says, watching as Thomas rolls up his sleeves. "Very difficult times indeed. Flour prices up again, coal not much better, and customers, well, they want their bread cheap, don't they? Won't pay a penny more, no matter what my costs are." Thomas says nothing. What could he say? He's heard this complaint from every employer he's ever had. Costs rise, but wages never do. "Got a delivery today," Middleton continues, gesturing to several sacks stacked against the wall. They're not the usual flour sacks. These are smaller, unmarked. "Special ingredients, going to help us stay competitive, see? Lots of bakeries doing it now. Have to keep up or go under." The uneasiness in Thomas's stomach intensifies. He's heard rumours of what some bakeries add to their dough to cut costs. Chalk for whiteness, alum to make the bread seem larger with less flour, even ground bones. He's always taken pride in the fact that Middleton's bread was pure. Just flour, water, and yeast. It was one of the reasons he'd stayed, despite the brutal conditions. "What sort of ingredients, sir?" he asks, though he suspects he already knows the answer. Middleton's eyes slide away from his. "Just some improvers. Make the bread whiter. Customers like that white bread, don't they? Think it's posh." He forces a laugh. "Nothing to worry about. All the big London bakeries use it. Been doing it for years." The door opens, letting in a swirl of fog and John's bulky frame. He nods to the room in general, then stops short when he sees Middleton. "Evening, sir," he says, surprise evident in his voice. "Just leaving, Walker," Middleton says. "Was explaining to Barrow here about our new process." He claps his hands together once, a forced gesture of finality. "Right then, I'll leave you to it. Need 50 extra loaves tonight. Big order from the factory canteen." After Middleton leaves, a heavy silence falls over the bakehouse. Thomas meets John's questioning gaze, then looks pointedly at the unmarked sacks. John's expression darkens as understanding dawns. "Chalk?" he asks quietly. "And alum, I'd wager," Simmons says, his voice neutral. "It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. Better than losing your job when the bakery closes because it can't compete." Thomas feels a surge of anger. "It's not right," he says. "People trust us. They're feeding this bread to their children." Simmons gives him a hard look. "It's this or nothing, Barrow. You've got family depending on you, haven't you? We all have. Times are hard." "And they are hard," Thomas knows. The bakery business operates on razor-thin margins. For every successful operation like the aerated bread company with its modern methods, dozens of small bakeries like Middleton's struggle to stay afloat. Competition is fierce, with hundreds of bakeries in Birmingham alone. It won't harm anyone, Simmons continues more gently now. Just bulks out the dough a bit, makes it look nicer. But Thomas has heard different stories. Alum interferes with digestion, preventing the body from absorbing nutrients from food. For the poor, whose diet consists mainly of bread, this could mean the difference between adequate nutrition and slow starvation. And children are especially vulnerable, their growing bodies more severely affected by the lack of proper nourishment. We've got work to do, Simmons says, ending the discussion. 20 stone tonight, plus those extra 50 loaves. Better get started. The usual routine begins. John heaves a sack of flour onto the edge of the trough, but before they tip it in, Simmons brings over one of the unmarked sacks. 10%, he says. That's what Middleton wants. 10% chalk to start. The chalk is a fine white powder, almost indistinguishable from flour, except for a faint grittiness when Thomas rubs it between his fingers. When mixed with the flour, it's impossible to tell it's there at all. But Thomas knows, and the knowledge sits heavy in his stomach as they begin the familiar process of mixing and kneading. The dough feels different, slightly gritty under his hands. The usual elasticity is diminished, and it takes more effort to work it into a smooth mass. Sweat pours down Thomas's face as he kneads, his muscles screaming with the effort. The coal fire burns hot in the oven, filling the small space with suffocating heat. Enough, Simmons says eventually. Let it prove. Thomas steps back, his arms trembling with exertion. His shirt is soaked through with sweat, and his lungs burn with each breath. But worse than the physical discomfort is the knot of shame in his chest. He's participating in a deception, helping to produce bread that isn't what it appears to be. The brief rest period offers no relief tonight. Thomas lies on the makeshift bed, staring at the ceiling, too troubled to sleep despite his exhaustion. Beside him, John snores softly, apparently unbothered by their new task. The boy, Jimmy, sits huddled in a corner, picking at a piece of dry bread, yesterday's leftovers. Thomas watches him for a moment, thinking of his own sisters back home. They're not much older than Jimmy, and like him, they're thin from never quite having enough to eat. Would they be eating adulterated bread too? The thought makes his stomach turn. "You all right, lad?" he asks quietly, not wanting to wake John. Jimmy looks up, startled to be addressed directly. "Yes, sir," he mumbles. "Not sir," Thomas says. "I'm just Thomas." Jimmy nods, eyes downcast. He's been at the bakery for 3 months now, but Thomas realizes he knows almost nothing about the boy. Like most fourth hands, he's quiet, does his work, and tries to avoid notice. "Where are you from?" Thomas asks. "Scotland," Jimmy says after a moment's hesitation. "Glasgow?" That explains the faint accent Thomas had sometimes noticed. "Long way from home." Jimmy shrugs. "No work there. Came down with my uncle, but he died. Consumption." He says this matter-of-factly, as if sudden death is simply a normal part of life, which, for the working poor, it often is. "You've got no family here?" Thomas asks, thinking again of his own sisters. Jimmy shakes his head. "Just me now." Thomas is about to ask more when Simmons's voice cuts through the quiet. "Dough's ready. Back to work." The moment of connection breaks, and they return to their tasks. The dough has risen, but not as well as usual. It's dense and slightly discoloured, the chalk affecting both its texture and appearance. But once it's shaped into loaves and baked, Thomas knows most customers won't notice the difference, at least not immediately. The night progresses in its usual rhythm of kneading, shaping and baking. When they break out the alum for the second batch, Thomas feels his resistance weakening. What choice does he have? If he refuses, Middleton will simply find someone else, someone desperate enough not to ask questions. And then where would Thomas be? Without work, without wages to send home, possibly even blacklisted in the trade. As dawn approaches, Mrs. Middleton arrives for her usual inspection. Today, she brings her daughter, a young woman of perhaps 18, dressed in a fashionable gown with a trim bonnet. She looks out of place in the grimy bakehouse, and she wrinkles her nose at the smell of sweat and coal. "These are for the Hendersons' breakfast," Mrs. Middleton says, pointing to a tray of fancy rolls. "Make sure they're delivered first, and warm, mind you. They're particular about that." The Hendersons are wealthy factory owners, part of Birmingham's industrial elite. Their bread, Thomas notes bitterly, is made with pure flour. No chalk, no alum. The adulterants are reserved for the working-class loaves, for people who have no choice but to buy the cheapest bread available. Mrs. Middleton's daughter watches with curious eyes as Thomas shapes a loaf. Her gaze makes him acutely aware of his appearance, flour-covered, sweat-stained, with dark circles under his eyes. He must look like a creature from another world to her, as far removed from her clean, comfortable life as the stars are from the earth. "Does he work all night, Mother?" she asks, not addressing Thomas directly. "Yes, dear, that's how we get fresh bread in the morning," Mrs. Middleton replies, as if explaining the habits of an interesting but slightly distasteful animal. "It seems very hard," the girl says, and there's genuine concern in her voice. Mrs. Middleton pats her hand. "It's the way it's always been done, dear. Now come along. The bakehouse is no place for a young lady." As they leave, Thomas feels a strange mix of emotions. Resentment at being viewed as some sort of curiosity, but also a flicker of hope that at least someone sees the difficulty of his life. Perhaps in time, more people will begin to question the conditions under which their daily bread is produced. The delivery round is more difficult than usual this morning. The cart seems heavier, though whether that's due to the extra loaves or Thomas's own fatigue and moral burden, he can't tell. Jimmy walks beside him, occasionally helping to push when they reach a hill. Their first stops are the grand houses on the outskirts of town, where servants accept the fancy rolls and pure loaves with barely a glance at the tired baker and his young assistant. Here, bread is just one of many items delivered daily to maintain the comfortable lifestyle of the wealthy. Next come the middle-class neighbourhoods, where clerks and shop owners live in modest but respectable houses. They too receive the better quality bread, though not as fine as that delivered to the wealthy. These customers sometimes exchange a word or two with Thomas, commenting on the weather or asking after his health with casual disinterest. Finally, they reach the working-class districts, rows of terraced houses packed tightly together, washing lines strung between buildings, children already playing in the narrow streets despite the early hour. Here, it's the adulterated loaves they deliver, the bread bulked out with chalk and alum that will form the main sustenance for families already struggling with poor nutrition. A woman answers the door at one house, a baby on her hip, and two small children clinging to her skirts. Her face is prematurely lined, her hair streaked with grey, though she can't be much older than 30. She counts out pennies carefully before accepting the loaf. And Thomas sees how thin her fingers are, how the bones stand out at her wrists. "Looks nice and white today," she says, examining the loaf with approval. "The children like it better when it's white." Thomas feels a stab of guilt. The whiteness she admires comes from the chalk, not from any superior quality of flour. But what can he say? That the bread she's feeding her children is adulterated? That it might contribute to the malnutrition already evident in their thin faces and dull eyes? "Yes, ma'am," he says instead, accepting her hard-earned pennies. As they move on, Jimmy speaks unexpectedly. "It's not right, is it?" he says quietly. "Different bread for different people." Thomas is surprised by the boy's perception. "No," he agrees, "it's not right." But what can we do? Jimmy asks, and it's a genuine question, not rhetorical. Thomas has no answer. What indeed can two powerless workers do against a system designed to maximize profit at the expense of the poor? In this industrial age, human health and dignity are secondary considerations at best. The rest of the deliveries pass in thoughtful silence. By the time they return to the bakery, the sun is fully up, casting a deceptively cheerful light on the smoke-stained buildings. Thomas's body aches with exhaustion, but his mind is troubled, preventing the usual mindless stumble through the final tasks of his shift. As he's cleaning the kneading trough, Mr. Middleton appears again, unusual for this time of day. He seems pleased, rubbing his hands together as he surveys the empty racks that indicate all bread has been sold. "Good work today, men," he says. "Very good work. Those factory orders make all the difference, eh? And not a complaint about quality." He chuckles, a conspiratorial sound that makes Thomas's skin crawl. "The chalk, sir," Thomas says before he can stop himself. It's not good for people, especially children." Middleton's jovial expression hardens. "Not your concern, Barrow. You're paid to bake, not to worry about such things." "But, sir—" "Enough." Middleton's voice is sharp now. "You think I like it. You think I want to put that stuff in my bread. I'm a businessman, Barrow. I have competitors who'd put me out of business in a heartbeat if I can't match their prices, and I can't match their prices without cutting corners somewhere." He steps closer, lowering his voice. "You've got family depending on you. I know that. So do I. So does every man here. Would you rather I close the bakery, put you all out of work? Is that better for the children you're so concerned about?" Thomas looks down, unable to meet his employer's gaze. The cruel logic of industrial capitalism has him trapped. Middleton is right. If he refuses to adulterate his bread, his competitors will simply continue the practice, and Middleton's bakery will fail. The only real solution would be regulation that applies to all bakeries equally, preventing any from gaining an advantage through adulteration. But such regulations seem a distant dream in a society that prioritizes profit above all else. "No, sir," Thomas says finally. "I understand." Middleton's expression softens slightly. "Look, it's not as bad as all that. People have been putting alum in bread for decades. If it was really dangerous, don't you think someone would have stopped it by now?" But Thomas knows that's not how things work. The poor have always been expendable, their suffering invisible to those with the power to enact change. Still, he nods, accepting the rationalization because he has no alternative. "Good man," Middleton says, clapping him on the shoulder. "Get some rest now. Big order again tomorrow night." The walk back to his lodgings feels longer than usual, each step an effort as fatigue and moral uncertainty weigh Thomas down. The streets are busy now, filled with people going about their daily business, factory workers heading for their shifts, women shopping at market stalls, children running errands or playing in the gutters. Thomas passes a group of ragged children sharing a loaf of bread, probably from Middleton's or another bakery just like it. They tear off pieces with dirty fingers, chewing eagerly. For them, even adulterated bread is better than no bread at all. Thomas wonders if that justifies what he's doing, then decides it doesn't. There should be better options than choosing between starvation and slow poisoning. His room offers little comfort when he finally reaches it. It's stifling now, the summer sun heating the small space to an uncomfortable degree. Thomas opens the window, but the air outside is thick with smoke and dust, offering no relief. He sits on the edge of his bed, too tired to even remove his flour-covered clothes, but too troubled to lie down. In his hand, he holds the coins that represent today's wages. Payment for his labour, yes, but also for his complicity in a system that values profit over human well-being. Half of these coins will go to his mother and sisters. Will they use them to buy bread from a bakery that adulterates its products just as he now does? The thought makes him feel ill. A knock at his door interrupts his brooding. It's his landlady, Mrs. Peabody, a widow who rents out rooms to make ends meet. "Letter for you, Mr. Barrow," she says, handing him an envelope. "From your mother, I think." Thomas thanks her, waiting until she's gone before opening the letter. His mother's handwriting is careful but unpracticed, the letters formed with obvious effort. "Dear Thomas, I hope this finds you well. We are managing here, thanks to your kindness. Your sisters send their love. Mary has found work at the milliner's in town, which helps with our expenses. We pray for you daily, knowing how hard you work. There is talk here of a new bakery opening, using machines to make bread without yeast. They say it's cleaner and healthier. Perhaps there might be work for you there, closer to home. I know you don't complain, but I worry about you in that big city, working those long hours. Please write when you can. We miss you terribly. Your loving mother." Thomas reads the letter twice, his mind catching on the mention of the new bakery. He's heard rumours of such places, bakeries using a new method developed by a Dr. Dorglish, where bread is made to rise using carbonated water instead of yeast. The aerated bread company in London is the most famous example, but the idea is spreading. The appeal is obvious. The bread is produced without the baker's sweat dripping into it, without the need for night work, without the exhausting physical labour of kneading enormous batches by hand. It's marketed as pure and hygienic, a modern alternative to traditional methods. But such bakeries would need fewer workers, and those workers would need different skills. What place would there be for someone like Thomas, whose only training is in the old methods? And would these new bakeries really be better, or would they simply find new ways to exploit their workers while presenting a clean facade to the public? Thomas has no answers to these questions. He folds his mother's letter carefully and places it in the small box where he keeps his few treasured possessions. Then, finally, he gives in to his exhaustion, stretching out on the narrow bed without bothering to undress. As sleep begins to claim him, his thoughts drift to the children he saw sharing bread in the street. In his half-dreaming state, their faces morph into those of his sisters, and then into Jimmy's thin, solemn face, all of them depending on adults to make decisions that will affect their health and future, all of them vulnerable in a society that sees them as little more than future workers to be maintained at minimum cost. The guilt and worry follow Thomas into his dreams, where he kneads endless mounds of dough that never come clean, no matter how hard he works. Chalk dust fills the air, choking him, covering everything in a fine white powder that looks like snow but tastes of deception and compromise. And through it all runs the question that has no easy answer. In a world where simply surviving requires participation in harmful systems, what does it mean to be a good person? Is it enough to recognize the wrong while still taking part in it? Or does true goodness require sacrifice, of security, of livelihood, perhaps even of the ability to help those who depend on you? Thomas finds no resolution, even in sleep. The questions echo in his mind as the day passes outside his window, the sun tracking across the sky, marking hours that bring him inexorably closer to another night at the bakery, another batch of adulterated bread, another compromise of his principles in the name of survival. And as evening approaches, he will rise again, wash his face, put on his flour-dusted clothes and walk back to Middleton's bakery, because what other choice does he have? In Victorian Birmingham, in the heart of industrial Britain, a man like Thomas Barrow has few options and many responsibilities. The system is larger than any individual, and survival often means finding a way to live with choices that are never truly free. Thomas wakes to the sound of children playing in the street below his window. For a moment, he's disoriented. It's still daylight, and his body, conditioned to sleep through the day and work at night, resists consciousness. Then he remembers. It's Sunday, his one day off. The bakery remains closed, giving its workers a brief respite from their grueling schedule. He sits up slowly, his muscles stiff and sore despite the extra hours of sleep. His chest feels tight, and he coughs, bringing up the familiar dark phlegm. 3 years of working in coal-heated bakeries has left its mark on his lungs. Sometimes he wonders how many more years they'll hold out. The room is stifling in the summer heat. Thomas rises and goes to the small basin in the corner, splashing water on his face and neck. The cool relief is momentary but welcome. He dresses in his cleanest shirt, still patched and worn, but free of flour dust at least, and decides to venture out. 1 day a week he allows himself to feel like part of the daylight world, to walk among people who sleep at night and work when the sun is up. Outside, Birmingham pulses with life, even on a Sunday. The streets near the factories are quieter than usual, but the markets and churches are busy. Thomas walks without any particular destination, simply enjoying the feeling of movement without exhaustion, of being outdoors, without hauling a heavy cart of bread. His wandering takes him to a part of town he rarely visits, where the buildings are newer and the streets wider, and there, on a prominent corner, he sees something that stops him in his tracks. A large modern building with plate glass windows and a sign that proclaims the Aerated Bread Company. Thomas has heard of this business, of course. Founded just a decade ago by Dr. John Dalglish, it represents a revolutionary approach to bread making. Instead of traditional yeast fermentation and exhausting hand kneading, the Aerated Bread Company uses a method where carbonated water is mixed with flour under pressure. The carbon dioxide in the water causes the bread to rise without yeast, and machines do much of the work that would normally fall to bakers like Thomas. Curiosity draws him closer. Through the windows, he can see a pristine interior, clean white walls, polished counters, and most surprisingly, women serving customers. This is another innovation of the Aerated Bread Company. Their tea rooms where respectable women can dine alone or with friends without male escorts. The contrast with Middleton's grimy underground bakehouse could not be more stark. Here, everything is open to view, a testament to the company's pride in its hygienic methods. No more bread kneaded by sweating men in the dead of night. No more coal dust settling on the dough. No more 18-hour shifts that leave bakers dead by 40. Thomas stands there for a long time, watching customers come and go. Most are well-dressed, the middle classes who can afford to dine out and who appreciate the company's claims of purity and modern methods. A young woman exits, carrying a small package wrapped in paper. She smiles at Thomas as she passes, then quickly looks away, perhaps noticing his worn clothes and the ingrained flour dust under his fingernails that never quite washes away. Quite something, isn't it? Thomas turns to find an older man standing beside him, also gazing at the building. He's well-dressed but not ostentatious, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Yes, sir," Thomas agrees, slightly uncomfortable to be addressed by someone of obviously higher social standing. "Dr. Dalglish was a visionary," the man continues. "Saw the problems with traditional bread making, the unhygienic conditions, the adulteration, the terrible toll on the bakers themselves, and found a scientific solution." Thomas's interest is piqued. "You knew him, sir?" "I did indeed. A brilliant man. Sadly, he died just a few years after founding the company. Worked himself to death introducing his new method." The man smiles wryly. Even inventors aren't immune to overwork, it seems. I'm a baker myself, Thomas finds himself saying. At Middleton's over on Camden Street. The man's eyebrows rise slightly. Traditional methods, I take it. Thomas nods. Very traditional. 20 stone of dough kneaded by hand. Coal-fired ovens. Hard work, the man comments, studying Thomas more closely now. Long hours, I expect. 18 hours is common. Start at 11 at night, finish around 5 in the afternoon with deliveries. The man shakes his head. Barbaric, if you don't mind my saying so. That's exactly what Dalglish wanted to change. No man should have to work like that. It's not just inhumane, it's inefficient. Tired workers make mistakes. Quality suffers. And the bread? Thomas asks, genuinely curious. Is it good? Try for yourself, the man suggests, gesturing toward the entrance. They serve it in their tea rooms, very popular with the middle classes. No baker's sweat, no adulterants, and consistently reliable quality. Thomas hesitates. The establishment is clearly meant for a different class of person than himself. His clothes are clean but shabby, his boots worn, his hands rough and calloused from years of labour. The man seems to read his thoughts. Go on, he encourages. They won't turn you away. This isn't some exclusive gentleman's club. Still uncertain, but too curious to refuse, Thomas nods his thanks and approaches the door. He takes a deep breath before entering, bracing himself for the discomfort of being somewhere he doesn't belong. Inside, the tea room is busy but not crowded. The space is airy and light, with high ceilings and large windows that let in the afternoon sun. Small tables are arranged with enough space between them for privacy, each covered with a clean white cloth and set with simple but elegant china. A young woman in a neat black dress and white apron approaches. "Table for one, sir?" she asks, showing no sign that she finds his presence unusual. "Yes, thank you," Thomas manages, following her to a small table near the window. "Would you like tea, sir? And perhaps some bread and butter? Our aerated bread is baked fresh throughout the day." "Yes, please," Thomas says, trying to sound more confident than he feels. "I've heard much about your bread." She smiles. "First visit to ABC, then? You'll find our bread quite different from the ordinary sort, much lighter and, of course, absolutely pure. No additives whatsoever." When she leaves, Thomas looks around, taking in his surroundings more carefully. The customers are indeed mostly middle class. Clerks, shopkeepers, a few professional men with their wives or daughters. But there are also working men like himself, though better dressed, perhaps enjoying a rare treat on their day off. Most striking of all are the women dining alone or in pairs, without male companions. In traditional eating establishments, this would be unthinkable. A woman dining alone would be assumed to be of questionable character. But here, respectable women can enjoy refreshments while shopping or travelling, a small but significant freedom in a society that strictly controls female behaviour. The waitress returns with a tray bearing a teapot, cup and saucer, and a plate with several slices of bread and a pat of butter. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Oh, no, thank you," Thomas says, reaching for his coin purse and wondering if he has enough for this unexpected expense. "You can pay at the counter when you leave," she explains with a kind smile, perhaps sensing his uncertainty. Left alone with his simple meal, Thomas turns his attention to the bread. It looks different from what he's used to, paler, with a more even texture. He spreads a little butter on a slice and takes a bite. The flavour is mild but pleasant, the texture indeed lighter than traditional bread. It lacks the depth of flavour that comes from yeast fermentation, but it's perfectly acceptable, and knowing that it contains no chalk, no alum, no adulterants of any kind makes it taste all the better. As he eats, Thomas considers what this new method might mean for bakers like himself. If machines can do the work of kneading, if bread can rise without yeast and the long hours of proving, if the whole process can be completed in daylight rather than requiring night work, what place is there for traditional journeyman bakers? The thought is troubling. Thomas has no other skills, no other trade to fall back on if baking changes beyond recognition. Yet he cannot deny the appeal of a method that spares bakers the back-breaking labour and deadly conditions he endures nightly. He's so lost in thought that he doesn't immediately notice when someone sits down at his table. Looking up with surprise, he finds the man from outside, now removing his hat and placing it on the empty chair beside him. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion," the man says. "Thought you might like to hear more about the aerated process since you're in the trade." "Not at all, sir," Thomas says, still somewhat uncomfortable, but also intrigued. "The bread is different. Good, but different." "It is indeed." "Ah, forgive my manners. I'm Dr. Benjamin Richardson." He extends his hand. Thomas shakes it, noting the soft palm and well-kept nails that have never known manual labour. "Thomas Barrow, sir. I'm on the board of directors for the company now," Richardson explains. "Took an interest after poor Dorglish passed away. Believed in his vision, you see. Still do." "It's certainly cleaner," Thomas acknowledges. "And easier on the bakers, I'd imagine." "Precisely." Richardson's eyes light up with enthusiasm. "The conditions in traditional bakeries are simply unconscionable. Underground rooms, no ventilation, coal dust everywhere, men working through the night when the body craves sleep. It's a recipe for disease and early death." Thomas can't argue with that assessment. He's seen older bakers coughing blood, their lungs ruined by years of inhaling flour dust and coal smoke. He's felt the constant exhaustion that comes from working against the body's natural rhythms. He's experienced the skin conditions that develop from constant contact with flour and heat. "But what happens to the journeyman?" Thomas asks, voicing his main concern. "If machines do the kneading, if the whole process is different, what becomes of men like me?" Richardson's expression turns thoughtful. "A fair question. The truth is, change is inevitable. The Industrial Revolution has transformed industry after industry, and baking can't remain stuck in medieval methods forever. So we're just obsolete." The word tastes bitter in Thomas's mouth. "Not obsolete," Richardson corrects gently, "but in need of adaptation. The aerated bread company still employs bakers, but they're trained in the new methods. They work reasonable hours in clean conditions. They operate machinery rather than breaking their bodies with manual labour. Most importantly, they live longer, healthier lives. And what of those who can't adapt, who are too old to learn new methods, or who can't find employment in these modern bakeries because they need fewer workers?" Richardson sighs. "That's the difficulty with progress, isn't it? It's never painless. But I ask you this, would it be better to preserve a system that kills its workers young simply to maintain employment? Is that truly the more humane option?" Thomas has no ready answer. He thinks of his aching back, his coal-damaged lungs, the knowledge that few bakers see their 50th birthday. Can he really argue for preserving conditions that are slowly killing him and thousands like him? "There's something else to consider," Richardson continues after a moment. "The adulteration problem. You're familiar with it, I presume." Thomas looks down at his half-eaten bread. "Yes, sir, very familiar. It's rampant in the industry. Alum, chalk, ground bones, even worse substances, all added to bread to increase profits at the expense of public health. The aerated bread company was founded on principles of purity, no adulterants, ever." "That's admirable," Thomas admits. "It's not just admirable, it's necessary. Do you know how many children suffer from malnutrition because their primary food source, bread, has been stripped of nutritional value by unscrupulous practices? How many working men and women can't maintain their health because what they believe to be wholesome bread is actually harmful?" The image of the thin woman and her children from his delivery route flashes in Thomas's mind. How many times had she commented on the pleasing whiteness of the bread, not knowing it came from chalk rather than quality? "I know," Thomas says quietly. "I see it every day." Richardson studies him for a moment. You strike me as a man of conscience, Mr. Barrow, and intelligence too. Have you considered seeking employment with a more progressive establishment? The aerated bread company is expanding rapidly. We need experienced bakers who can adapt to our methods. The suggestion catches Thomas off guard. Leave Middleton's? The thought has crossed his mind, especially since they began adulterating the bread, but the idea of working for a modern company like ABC seems far-fetched. Would they really hire someone like him, uneducated with experience only in traditional methods? I haven't considered it, he admits. Oh, well, perhaps you should. Richardson reaches into his pocket and produces a small card, which he slides across the table. We're opening a new location in Birmingham next month. If you're interested, come by. Mention my name to the manager. Thomas takes the card, reading the elegant print. Dr. Benjamin Ward Richardson, Director, the Aerated Bread Company, Lustede. Thank you, sir, he says, tucking the card carefully into his pocket. Richardson checks his pocket watch. I must be going. Train to catch. But it was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Barrow. I hope our paths cross again. After Richardson leaves, Thomas remains at the table, finishing his tea and contemplating this unexpected turn of events. The possibility of a different life, one without night work, without coal dust, without adulterating bread, seems suddenly tantalizingly real. But doubts crowd in as well. Would he be able to learn the new methods? Would the pay be comparable to what he earns now? And what of his loyalty to Middleton's despite recent developments? He's worked there for 3 years now, longer than at any previous bakery. Eventually, he pays his bill and steps back out into the late afternoon sunshine. The streets are quieter now as Sunday draws to a close, families returning home for the evening meal, shops closing their doors. Tomorrow, the city will roar back to life with the clamour of industry, and Thomas will return to his nocturnal existence, mixing chalk into dough and breathing coal dust until dawn. The contrast between that life and the clean, well-lit interior of the aerated bread company couldn't be more stark. As Thomas walks slowly back toward his lodgings, Richardson's card seems to burn in his pocket, a ticket to a possible future he hadn't imagined for himself. His route takes him past Middleton's bakery, silent and dark on this day of rest. He pauses, looking at the familiar building with new eyes. The small, grimy windows, the worn bricks, the narrow door that leads down to the underground bakehouse, all of it suddenly seems antiquated, a relic of a passing era. Is this really where he belongs? Is this where he wants to spend his remaining years, however many his lungs will permit? As Thomas continues homeward, his mind is occupied with visions of 2 possible futures, one in the sooty darkness of Middleton's, kneading adulterated dough by night, the other in the clean modernity of the aerated bread company, learning new skills and producing pure bread by day. The choice seems obvious when framed that way, yet change is never simple, especially for a man of Thomas's background and circumstances. The familiar, however flawed, exerts its own powerful gravity. Back in his lodgings, Thomas carefully places Richardson's card on his small table, propping it against the water jug where he'll see it in the morning. Then he prepares for bed, knowing he needs to return to his night schedule for the week ahead. As he lies in the growing darkness, listening to the last sounds of Sunday evening fade outside his window, Thomas allows himself to imagine a different life. One where he doesn't cough blood by 30. One where he can visit his mother and sisters without looking like a ghost. Hollow-eyed and flower-pale. One where he contributes to the health of his customers rather than slowly poisoning them with adulterants. Sleep claims him eventually, and his dreams are filled with strange, bright spaces where bread rises without yeast and machines do the work that breaks men's bodies. The next evening, Thomas rises as usual and makes his way to Middleton's through streets transitioning from day to night. Workers returning home pass him as he heads toward his labour, the opposite rhythm of his life marking him as separate, other. When he arrives at the bakery, he finds an unusual scene. John and Jimmy are already there, but so is Mr. Middleton, engaged in animated conversation with a well-dressed stranger. They fall silent as Thomas enters, all eyes turning to him. "Ah, Barrow," Middleton says, his tone unnaturally hearty. "Just the man. Come meet Mr. Harrison. He's from the Aerated Bread Company." Thomas freezes halfway through removing his coat, certain for a wild moment that his thoughts of yesterday have somehow manifested this visitor. But that's nonsense. Of course, just a coincidence. "Good evening," he manages, extending his hand to the stranger. Harrison shakes it firmly. "Mr. Barrow, I understand you're the senior journeyman here?" Thomas glances at John, who shrugs slightly. "I suppose I am, yes." "Mr. Harrison is interested in our operation," Middleton explains, though his tight smile suggests this interest may not be entirely welcome. "The Aerated Bread Company is opening a new establishment here in Birmingham, and they're researching local practices." The slight hesitation tells Thomas all he needs to know. ABC isn't researching. They're scouting the competition, perhaps even looking to poach experienced bakers. "I've just been explaining to Mr. Middleton that our company is always looking for skilled men who might be interested in learning our methods," Harrison says, confirming Thomas's suspicion. "The pay is competitive, the hours regular, daylight hours I might add, and the conditions far superior to traditional bakeries." The slight pause before traditional makes it clear what Harrison really thinks of places like Middleton's. His gaze moves pointedly to the coal heap by the oven, the low ceiling blackened with years of smoke, the worn trough with its decades of ingrained flour. "We're quite content with our methods here," Middleton says stiffly. "Been baking bread this way for 30 years, and my father before me." Of course, Harrison soothes. "And very fine bread it is, I'm sure. But progress is inevitable, Mr. Middleton. The public is becoming more conscious of hygiene, of purity in their food. They want bread made in clean conditions, without additives." The pointed reference to adulteration makes Middleton's face flush. "I don't know what you're implying, sir, but our bread is perfectly wholesome." Harrison merely smiles. "I'm not implying anything, simply stating that the Aerated Bread Company guarantees absolutely pure bread, made without any adulterants whatsoever. It's one of our primary selling points." The tension in the room is palpable. Jimmy fidgets nervously near the coal heap, while John methodically prepares the trough, pretending not to listen, though Thomas knows he is absorbing every word. "Well, I won't keep you from your work," Harrison says after a moment. He reaches into his pocket and produces several cards, identical, Thomas notes with a jolt, to the one Richardson gave him yesterday. "If any of you gentlemen are interested in learning more about opportunities with the Aerated Bread Company, please don't hesitate to call on me." He places the cards on a small shelf near the door, nods politely to the room at large, and takes his leave. Middleton stares after him, his expression a mixture of anger and worry. "Or vultures," he mutters once Harrison is gone, "circling before the body's even cold." "Sir?" Thomas questions. Middleton sighs heavily, suddenly looking older than his 50 years. "They're opening just 2 streets over. Modern equipment, all the latest methods. How am I supposed to compete with that? They'll undercut my prices while boasting about their purity." He spits the last word as if it tastes foul. "Perhaps we could stop using the—" Thomas hesitates, not wanting to say adulterants outright. "The additives. Return to pure bread." Middleton gives a bitter laugh. "And charge what for it? More than the factory workers and labourers who buy from us can afford to pay, or should I simply make less profit when I'm already barely keeping this place open?" He shakes his head. "No, Barrow. We either adapt or we die. That's the way of things now." The irony of his words isn't lost on Thomas. adapt or die. Exactly what Dr. Richardson had said about traditional bakers themselves. Now, enough talk, Middleton says, straightening his waistcoat. You got work to do. 20 stone tonight, and the usual fancy breads for morning. After Middleton leaves, the bakehouse returns to its normal routine. The familiar actions, mixing, kneading, shaping, baking, carry Thomas through the night as they always do. But his mind keeps returning to Harrison's visit, to the cards by the door, which John and Jimmy had each quietly pocketed when they thought no one was looking, and to the stark choice facing not just himself, but Middleton's bakery as a whole. The Industrial Revolution had transformed industry after industry, bringing machines to replace human labour, standardization to replace individual craft, efficiency to replace tradition. Now it was coming for baking, one of the oldest trades, virtually unchanged for centuries. As Thomas kneads the heavy dough, feeling the familiar burn in his muscles and the sweat pouring down his back, he wonders how many more nights like this lie before him. How many more he can endure, how many more he wants to endure, now that he knows an alternative exists. The chalk and alum go into the dough as usual, and as usual Thomas feels the pang of conscience as he imagines the families who will consume this bread, trusting in its wholesomeness. The aerated bread company's guarantee of purity seems more appealing than ever. By morning, as he delivers the day's bread through streets coming alive with dawn, Thomas has made his decision. The card Dr. Richardson gave him is still in his pocket, a promise of a different future. As soon as his deliveries are done, instead of returning to his lodgings to sleep, he will visit the address printed on the card. He will inquire about employment with the aerated bread company. The thought brings both excitement and anxiety. Change is never easy, especially for someone like Thomas, whose life has followed a predictable pattern for years. But the alternative, continuing as he is until his health fails completely, is no longer acceptable. As the sun rises fully over Birmingham, casting long shadows from the factory chimneys and warming the cobblestones beneath his feet, Thomas feels a cautious hope take root within him. Perhaps there is a place for him in this new industrial age after all, not clinging desperately to dying traditions, but embracing the changes that might paradoxically allow him a longer, healthier life than his predecessors in the trade. The bread cart seems lighter as he pushes it through the final deliveries, his step more purposeful. For the first time in years, Thomas Barrow is looking forward to the day ahead, rather than merely enduring it until he can collapse into exhausted sleep. The aerated future beckons, bright with possibility, and the promise of bread untainted by chalk, alum, or the sweat of men working themselves to death in the dark. The aerated bread company's new Birmingham location is still under construction when Thomas arrives, but already it looks nothing like the bakeries he's familiar with. The building is spacious and well lit, with large windows that will allow passers-by to see the bread-making process. A deliberate contrast to the hidden, often underground bakeries of the traditional trade. Men in work clothes move about, installing gleaming machinery that Thomas can't even identify. He stands uncertainly at the entrance, card in hand, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. His clothes, though the cleanest he owns, are worn and flour-dusted. His face is pale from years of night work, with dark circles under his eyes that never fully fade. His hands are rough and calloused, the nails permanently rimmed with flour that no amount of scrubbing can remove. A smartly dressed man notices him hovering and approaches. "Can I help you?" Thomas holds out Dr. Richardson's card. "I was told to ask for the manager about employment." The man examines the card, eyebrows rising slightly at the name. "Dr. Richardson sent you, did he? Interesting. Come this way, please." He leads Thomas through the half-finished space, past workmen installing counters and shelving, to a small office at the back. Inside, A middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard sits at a desk covered with papers and blueprints. Mr. Carmichael, this gentleman has a card from Dr. Richardson about employment. Carmichael looks up, assessing Thomas with a quick, practised glance. Thank you, Phillips. He gestures to the chair opposite his desk. Please, sit down. Mr. Barrow, sir. Thomas Barrow. And you're a baker, I presume? Carmichael asks as Thomas takes the offered seat. Yes, sir. Currently at Middleton's on Camden Street. Been there 3 years now. Ah, Middleton's. Carmichael's tone suggests he's familiar with the establishment. Traditional methods, I understand. Very traditional, sir. And what brings you to us, Mr. Barrow? Why leave the familiar for something so different? Thomas considers his answer carefully. He could mention the adulterants, the terrible conditions, the toll on his health, all valid reasons to seek new employment. But something tells him Carmichael is looking for more than just a man running away from hardship. I believe the future lies with methods like yours, sir, he says finally. I've worked the old way long enough to know its costs, to the bakers and to the customers. When I heard about the aerated bread company, about bread made without adulterants, in clean conditions, without night work, it seemed like something worth being part of. Carmichael studies him thoughtfully. An honest answer, but I must ask, what skills do you bring to us? Our methods are quite different from what you're accustomed to. We use machinery, scientific principles. Our bakers need to understand the process, not just follow traditional practices. Thomas feels his hopes begin to sink. Of course they want educated men, not labourers like himself who learned their trade through apprenticeship rather than schooling. I'm a quick learner, sir, he says, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. I may not have formal education, but I understand bread. I know when dough is right, when it needs more water or more flour. I know how heat affects fermentation, how different flours behave differently. That knowledge still applies, doesn't it, even with your new methods? A small smile appears beneath Carmichael's beard. Indeed it does, Mr. Barrow. Indeed it does. Technical knowledge can be taught, but the instinct for bread that comes only with experience. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Let me be frank. We need men who understand baking, yes, but we also need men who believe in what we're doing. This isn't just a new method, it's a new philosophy of food production. Clean, pure, honest bread made in conditions that don't kill the bakers. If you truly believe in that, you'll learn what you need to know. I do believe in it, sir, Thomas says, and realises as he speaks that it's true. His meeting with Dr. Richardson, his visit to the ABC tea room, the contrast with the grim reality of Middleton's, all have convinced him that this new approach is not just better, but necessary. Carmichael nods, seemingly satisfied. Very well. We open in 3 weeks. I can offer you a position as a junior baker to start. The wage is 18 shillings a week. Thomas blinks in surprise. That's less than he makes at Middleton's, where he earns 20 shillings as a senior journeyman. The reduction would mean less money to send home to his mother and sisters. Carmichael reads his expression. The hours are 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, with Sundays off, he adds. No night work, and there's opportunity for advancement as you learn our methods. Thomas weighs the offer carefully. Less money, but regular daylight hours, a chance to learn skills that represent the future of his trade rather than its past, and perhaps most importantly, escape from the coal dust and adulterants that are slowly killing him. When would I start? He asks. 2 weeks from Monday. That will give you time to give notice at Middleton's and for us to complete the installation of our equipment. The first week will be training, learning our methods, understanding the machinery. Carmichael extends his hand across the desk. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Barrow? Thomas hesitates only briefly before taking the offered hand. We do, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. As he leaves the building, stepping back into the bright afternoon sunshine, Thomas feels a curious mixture of emotions: relief at the prospect of escaping the deadly conditions of Middleton's, anxiety about learning new methods at his age, 28, not old by normal standards but already wearing down from the baker's life, guilt at the thought of leaving the bakery where he's worked for 3 years, and worry about the reduction in wages, which will mean tightening an already tight belt. But beneath all these conflicting feelings is a sense of possibility that he hasn't experienced in years, a future that might extend beyond the 42 years that is the average life expectancy for a baker, a chance to make bread he can be proud of, bread that nourishes rather than harms. The walk back to his lodgings takes him past a park where children are playing, their shouts and laughter carrying on the summer air. Thomas pauses, watching them. In 2 weeks he'll be working normal hours like most people. He'll have evenings free, Sundays off. He'll be part of the daylight world again, not a nocturnal creature passing like a ghost through other people's normal lives. The thought brings an unexpected lump to his throat. It's been so long since he's lived that way that he barely remembers what it feels like to have a normal rhythm to his days, to sleep when it's dark and work when it's light. Back in his room, Thomas sits down to write to his mother. She should know about this change in his circumstances, both the good news of better conditions and healthier work, and the more difficult news of reduced wages, at least initially. As he dips his pen in ink, he realizes he feels more awake, more alert than usual at this time of day. Normally, having been up all night, he would be fighting to keep his eyes open, his body craving the sleep it's denied during natural hours. But today, the prospect of change has energized him, pushing back the chronic fatigue that has been his constant companion for years. "Dear Mother," he begins, and then pauses, considering how to explain his decision. His mother has never seen the inside of a bakehouse, has no real understanding of the conditions he works in. How can he make her understand why he would accept less money for what might seem, on the surface, to be the same job? In the end, he keeps his explanation simple. "I am writing to share news of a change in my circumstances. I have accepted a position with a new bakery, the aerated bread company, which uses modern methods. The hours are better, normal daylight hours, and the conditions much healthier. The pay is slightly less to start, but there is opportunity for advancement as I learn their methods. I believe this change will allow me to work for many more years than would be possible in my current position, and eventually to earn more than I do now. Please assure Mary and Anne that I will continue to send what I can each month, though it may be slightly less for a time. This sacrifice now will, I believe, lead to better circumstances for all of us in the future. Your loving son, Thomas." He seals the letter, ready to post it in the morning before heading to Middleton's for what will now be one of his final night shifts. The thought brings both relief and a strange melancholy. For all its hardships, the night bakery has been his world for years. He knows its rhythms, its smells, its particular pains and small satisfactions. To leave it is to leave a part of himself behind. But as he prepares for sleep, real sleep, the deep rest his body has been craving, Thomas knows he's made the right decision. The future lies with methods like those of the aerated bread company, not with the traditional practices that are killing men like him one night shift at a time. The next evening, Thomas arrives at Middleton's to find John and Jimmy already there, preparing for the night's baking. Simmons appears from the small office at the back, where he keeps the accounts and records of orders. "You're late, Barrow," he says, though as usual, Thomas is precisely on time. "Sorry, sir," Thomas replies automatically, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. The familiar smell of the bakehouse, flour, yeast, coal smoke, and the sweat of men who've worked too long in too much heat envelops him like an unwelcome embrace. He works silently for a time, helping John heave the heavy sacks of flour into the trough, adding water, beginning the exhausting process of kneading. His muscles protest as always, but knowing that his time here is limited makes the pain more bearable somehow. When Simmons steps out to check an order, John speaks in a low voice. "Heard you went to see about that new place, the aerated bread company." Thomas glances up, surprised. News travels fast in the close-knit world of bakery workers. "How did you know?" John shrugs, continuing to knead. "Baker at the Crown and Anchor saw you go in. Word gets around." Thomas isn't sure how to respond. He hasn't yet given his notice to Middleton or Simmons, and it feels disloyal to discuss his plans with another employee first. "They offered me a position," he admits finally. "I start in 2 weeks." John nods slowly. "Thought you might. Heard they're hiring. Decent conditions, they say. Regular hours?" "Yes, no more night work. Less pay, though," John comments. "That's what I heard." "To start," Thomas agrees, "but there's room to advance, and—" he hesitates, then decides to be honest. "And I might live long enough to see 40 if I'm not breathing coal dust every night." John gives a short, humourless laugh. There is that. He pauses in his kneading, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. "I've been thinking about it too. Applied yesterday." This surprises Thomas. John has always seemed more accepting of the baker's lot than he is, less troubled by the conditions or the adulterants. "You did?" "Got a wife and 3 little ones," John says simply. "Want to see them grow up. Won't do that if I stay here much longer." He coughs, a deep, rattling sound that comes from lungs already damaged by years in the bakehouse. "Besides, I'm tired of putting chalk in people's bread. Doesn't sit right." They fall silent as Simmons returns, but Thomas feels a new kinship with John. They're both seeking escape from conditions that have remained essentially unchanged for centuries, while the world around them transforms through industrial innovation. Later, as they shape the dough into loaves, Jimmy approaches Thomas. The boy has filled out somewhat in the months he's worked at Middleton's, but he's still thin, with the hollow-cheeked look of someone who never quite gets enough to eat. "Is it true, Mr. Barrow?" he asks quietly. "You're going to that new place?" "Yes," Thomas admits. "In 2 weeks." Jimmy's expression falls. "Oh, what is it, lad?" The boy shrugs, turning away. "Nothing, just you've been kind to me is all. Showed me things. The others don't bother." Thomas feels a pang of guilt. He hasn't given much thought to what his departure might mean for Jimmy. The boy has no family, no one looking out for him except, in a limited way, Thomas himself. "Have you thought about coming too?" he asks impulsively. "To the aerated bread company? They'll need young lads as well as experienced bakers." Hope flashes across Jimmy's face. "Do you think they'd take me? I don't know anything about their methods." "Neither do I," Thomas points out. "We'd learn together, and you're young. It'll be easier for you to adapt than for old men like me and John." Jimmy's smile is the brightest thing in the grimy bakehouse. "I'll go tomorrow, on my half-day. Ask them." "Tell them I sent you," Thomas says. "That might help." The night continues in its usual pattern of exhausting labour, punctuated by brief periods of rest while the dough proves. But there's a different feeling in the bakehouse tonight, a sense of impending change, of possibilities opening up. It's during one of these rest periods, as Thomas and John doze on their makeshift beds and Jimmy tends the fire, that Mr. Middleton arrives unexpectedly. His heavy tread on the stairs wakes Thomas from his light sleep. "Barrow," Middleton says without preamble. "A word." Thomas follows him to the small office, already suspecting what this is about. Word travels fast indeed. Middleton closes the door and turns to face him, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "So you're leaving us for the aerated bread company? There's no point in denying it." "Yes, sir, in 2 weeks. After all I've done for you, 3 years of steady employment, a senior position, good wages." Thomas bristles slightly at the implication that he's being ungrateful. "I've worked hard for those wages, sir. 18-hour shifts, night after night." "That's the baker's life," Middleton says dismissively. "Has been for centuries. My father worked the same hours, his father before him. And how long did they live, sir?" The question hangs in the air between them. Middleton doesn't answer directly, but a flicker of something, pain, acknowledgement, crosses his face. "It's not just the hours," Thomas continues, emboldened by the certainty that he's already secured new employment. "It's the conditions, the coal dust, the heat, and now the adulterants." Middleton's face hardens. "You know why we use those? To stay competitive, to keep prices low enough for working people to afford. The aerated bread company can charge more for their so-called pure bread because they're selling to the middle classes, not to factory workers who count every penny. They're hiring workers, sir, men like me and John. That means they're planning to produce bread common people can afford. And put traditional bakeries like mine out of business in the process," Middleton says bitterly. "Progress, they call it. I call it destruction. Machines replacing men. Factories replacing craftsmen. Is that what you want, Barrow? To help destroy your own trade?" The question strikes at the heart of Thomas's own doubts and uncertainties. Is that what he's doing? Betraying centuries of tradition, the very skills he spent his life mastering? But then he thinks of the chalk and alum going into the bread, the coughing fits that wake him from sleep, bringing up dark phlegm, the bone-deep exhaustion that never quite goes away, the knowledge that few bakers see their 50th birthday. "I want to make good bread, sir," he says finally, "bread that nourishes people instead of making them sick, and I want to live long enough to see my sisters grown and settled. I don't think that makes me a traitor to my trade." Middleton stares at him for a long moment, then sighs heavily, the anger seeming to drain out of him. 2 weeks, you say?" "Yes, sir. Work them out properly and I'll give you a reference." "That's fair. Thank you, sir." When Thomas returns to the main bakehouse, John raises an eyebrow in question. Thomas gives a small nod. All is well, or as well as can be expected. The rest of the night passes in the usual blur of hard labour and heat, but as dawn approaches and they load the bread onto carts for delivery, Thomas finds himself noticing details he usually ignores in his exhausted state, the particular quality of early morning light filtering through the grimy windows. The smell of fresh bread momentarily overcoming the less pleasant odours of the bakehouse. The sound of the city awakening outside, ready to consume what he and his fellow bakers have produced through their night's labour. Soon he'll experience mornings differently, as the beginning of his workday rather than the end of it, as something to greet with energy rather than exhaustion. The thought is both strange and exhilarating. The next 2 weeks pass quickly. Thomas works his shifts at Middleton's, training a new journeyman who will take his place, a young man barely 20, already coughing from the coal dust after just a few years in the trade. Each night, as he kneads the heavy dough and breathes the contaminated air, Thomas's certainty grows that he's making the right decision. Jimmy comes back from his visit to the aerated bread company glowing with excitement. They've offered him a position as well, starting the same day as Thomas. He'll earn less initially than he does at Middleton's, but like Thomas, he sees the opportunity for a healthier future as worth the temporary sacrifice. John, however, returns from his inquiry with less positive news. They've filled all the positions for experienced bakers, he tells Thomas during one of their rest periods. Said they might have something in a few months when they open another location. Thomas can see the disappointment in his friend's face. I'm sorry, John. John shrugs, affecting indifference. It's all right, I'll find something else. Maybe one of the other new bakeries opening up. They say there'll be more coming using these modern methods. I hope so, Thomas says sincerely. You deserve better than this. He gestures at the grimy bakehouse, the coal heap, the trough where they spend hour after hour breaking their bodies to produce bread that slowly poisons its consumers. On Thomas's final night at Middleton's, there's a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Simmons is less critical than usual, almost gentle in his instructions. John works alongside Thomas with a quiet solidarity, taking on slightly more of the heavy lifting to spare his departing colleague. Even Mr. Middleton makes an appearance, bringing a small bottle of ale for each of the men, a rare gesture of appreciation. To your health, Barrow, he says, raising his own bottle in a toast that carries more meaning than the simple words suggest. To health, indeed, the very thing Thomas is leaving to preserve. When dawn comes and the final batch of bread is loaded onto carts for delivery, Thomas feels an unexpected surge of emotion. For all its hardships, this place has been his world for 3 years. These men, Simmons with his gruff efficiency, John with his stoic endurance, young Jimmy with his quiet determination, have been his companions through countless nights of shared labour. We'll see you around, Barrow, John says, clapping him on the shoulder as Thomas prepares to leave for the last time. Bread world's a small one, even with all these changes coming. I hope so, Thomas replies, and means it. Take care of yourself, John. Jimmy hovers nearby, clearly wanting to say something but unsure how. Thomas saves him the trouble, drawing the boy into a brief, awkward embrace. I'll see you Monday morning, he reminds him. At the new place. Don't be late. Jimmy grins. I won't. It'll be strange working in daylight. For both of us, Thomas agrees. Simmons is the last to bid him farewell, extending a flour-dusted hand. You're a good baker, Barrow, he says simply, whatever methods you use. The compliment, rare from the taciturn foreman, means more to Thomas than he would have expected. Thank you, sir. I learned from the best. And then it's over. Thomas steps out of Middleton's bakery into the morning sunlight, a journeyman baker without a bakery for the first time in his adult life, but only until Monday, when he'll begin his new position at the aerated bread company, learning methods that represent the future of his trade. As he walks home through streets busy with morning activity, Thomas feels lighter somehow, as if he's shed a burden he didn't fully recognise he was carrying. The future stretches before him, uncertain but full of possibility. For 3 days he allows himself the luxury of normal sleep at night, normal wakefulness during the day. His body, conditioned to years of nocturnal labour, resists at first, but gradually begins to adjust. By Sunday night, the evening before he's to start at the aerated bread company, he finds himself naturally growing tired as darkness falls, ready to sleep when most people sleep and wake when most people wake. It's a small thing, perhaps, this alignment with the natural rhythms of the world, but to Thomas it feels like reclaiming a piece of his humanity that the baker's life had stolen from him. As he drifts off to sleep that night, the coal fire banked low in his small grate. Thomas Barrow is not just a baker transitioning from one employer to another. He is a man standing at the crossroads of tradition and innovation, of past and future, choosing a path that might, just might, allow him to escape the deadly legacy of his trade. And somewhere in Birmingham, the new machinery of the aerated bread company stands ready, gleaming in the moonlight that filters through large, clean windows. Machinery that will change forever the way bread is made, and perhaps save the lives of men like Thomas in the process. Monday morning arrives with pale sunshine filtering through Thomas's window. For the first time in years, he wakes to daylight as a working man, not as someone whose labour is done and who now seeks the oblivion of exhausted sleep. The sensation is strange but pleasant, a return to natural rhythms that his body remembers somewhere deep in its cells. He dresses with unusual care in his cleanest shirt and trousers, runs a comb through his hair, and even polishes his worn boots as best he can. First impressions matter, and though Mr. Carmichael has already hired him, Thomas wants to begin his new position with dignity. The streets are busy with morning traffic as he makes his way to the aerated bread company's new location. Workers hurry toward factories and offices, women queue at shops just opening their doors, children run toward school or work with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Thomas is now part of this daytime world, this normal flow of human activity, no longer a nocturnal creature passing like a ghost through other people's lives. The building that houses the new bakery looks different in the morning light, larger, more imposing, its freshly painted sign gleaming above large windows that reveal the activity within. Through the glass, Thomas can see men in clean white uniforms moving about, tending to machinery that still looks alien to his eyes accustomed to the simple tools of traditional baking. Jimmy is already there, waiting nervously outside the entrance, shifting from foot to foot. His face lights up when he sees Thomas approaching. "You came," he says, relief evident in his voice. "Of course I came," Thomas replies, surprised by the boy's doubt. "Did you think I wouldn't?" Jimmy shrugs. People say things, don't always mean them. The simple statement reveals much about the boy's life experience, and Thomas feels a renewed sense of responsibility toward him. "Well, I meant it. We're starting something new together. Ready?" Jimmy nods, squaring his thin shoulders. "Ready." Inside, the bakery is a hive of activity. The space is bright and airy, with high ceilings and good ventilation, already a stark contrast to the cramped, smoky confines of Middleton's underground bakehouse. Men in white uniforms move purposefully among gleaming machinery, and the air smells of fresh bread without the underlying notes of coal smoke and sweat that Thomas has come to associate with baking. Mr. Phillips, the man who first greeted Thomas during his interview, spots them and comes over. "Ah, Mr. Barrow, and this must be the young man you recommended." He gives Jimmy an appraising look. "James Sullivan, yes?" "Yes, sir," Jimmy says, standing straighter. "Well, you're both on time. That's a good start." Phillips gestures for them to follow him. "We'll get you your uniforms first, then begin training." The uniforms are another surprise. Clean white cotton, similar to what surgeons might wear, with aprons to match. Thomas has never worn anything like it for baking. At Middleton's and every other traditional bakery, men worked in their own clothes, which quickly became impregnated with flour, sweat, and coal dust. "We change into fresh uniforms daily," Phillips explains, seeing their expressions. "The company launders them. Cleanliness is central to our method and our reputation." Once changed, Thomas and Jimmy join several other new employees, a mix of experienced bakers like Thomas and younger assistants like Jimmy, for their introduction to the aerated bread company's methods. Their instructor is a middle-aged man named Wilson who wears spectacles and speaks with the precision of someone with scientific training. "The Dorglish method," he begins, "represents a complete departure from traditional bread making. Instead of yeast, we use carbon dioxide gas dissolved in water under pressure. When mixed with flour, this creates a dough that rises without fermentation." He leads them to a large metal contraption that Thomas learns is called a carbonating apparatus. "Water is carbonated here," Wilson explains, "then mixed with flour in this sealed chamber." He points to another piece of machinery. "The mixture remains under pressure until it's divided and shaped, at which point the gas expands, causing the dough to rise almost instantly." It all sounds like something from a scientific journal rather than a bakery, and Thomas can see similar confusion on the faces of the other traditional bakers, but Wilson is patient, explaining each step of the process in detail, demonstrating how the various machines work, and answering questions with respectful attention. The advantages of our method are numerous, he continues. First, the entire process takes just 2 hours from start to finish compared to the 12 to 14 hours required for traditional fermentation. Second, the bread is untouched by human hands throughout most of the process, ensuring hygienic production. Third, there is no need for adulterants like alum to enhance the appearance or size of the loaf. Our bread is absolutely pure. This last point earns murmurs of approval from the former traditional bakers, several of whom exchange knowing glances with Thomas. They've all participated in the adulteration of bread, all felt the moral discomfort of deceiving their customers, all witnessed the effects on the poor who relied on bread as their primary food source. And finally, Wilson concludes, our method allows for production during normal daylight hours in clean, well-ventilated conditions. No more night work, no more coal dust in your lungs, no more 18-hour shifts that break men's bodies and shorten their lives. He looks around the group, his expression serious. Gentlemen, what we're doing here isn't just making bread differently. We're transforming a trade that has remained essentially unchanged for centuries. It's a privilege to be part of this revolution. But it also requires an open mind and a willingness to learn new skills. The training proceeds from theory to practice. Under Wilson's guidance, the new employees are taught how to operate the various machines, how to monitor the carbonation process, how to judge when the dough is properly mixed, how to shape the loaves for baking, and how to tend the gas-fired ovens that have replaced the coal-fired monstrosities of traditional bakeries. For Thomas, it's like learning a new language. Everything is different. The texture of the dough, the timing of the process, the tools used. Gone is the physical punishment of kneading 20 stone of dough by hand. Instead, he learns to operate levers and valves, to read gauges and dials, to judge the quality of bread by more precise measures than the practiced eye and hand of the traditional baker. The work is still demanding. There are heavy sacks to lift, hot ovens to tend, endless loaves to shape and check. But it's a different kind of labour, engaging the mind as much as the body, and the conditions are incomparably better. The air is clean, the temperature comfortable, the lighting good. There are proper facilities for washing, proper breaks for meals, proper consideration for the health and well-being of the workers. At midday, they break for lunch, which is provided by the company in a small dining room adjacent to the bakery. Simple fare, bread, cheese, cold meat, tea, but nourishing and served in clean, pleasant surroundings. Thomas sits with Jimmy and several other new employees, all of them somewhat overwhelmed by the morning's instruction. It's like learning to be a scientist, not a baker, comments one man, George, who had worked at a traditional bakery in Manchester before coming to Birmingham. All these gauges and measurements. In my old place, we judged the dough by feel, the oven by the colour of the bricks. And your lungs, by how much blood you coughed up each morning, adds another, William, with grim humour. I'll take gauges and dials over that. There's a murmur of agreement. Whatever their reservations about the new methods, none of them miss the deadly conditions of traditional bakeries. What about the bread, though? Thomas asks, giving voice to a concern that's been growing as he learns more about the aerated process. Is it good? Does it taste right? Wilson, who has joined them for the meal, smiles slightly. A fair question, Mr. Barrow. Why don't you judge for yourself? He breaks off a piece of the bread they're eating and hands it to Thomas. This was made by our method. Thomas examines the slice carefully before tasting it. The texture is different from traditional bread, more uniform with smaller air pockets. The crust is thinner, less chewy. He takes a bite, considering the flavour carefully. It's mild and pleasant, perfectly acceptable bread. It lacks some of the complexity that comes from yeast fermentation, but it's also free from the slightly bitter aftertaste that adulterants like alum impart. And knowing that it contains nothing but flour, water, salt and carbon dioxide makes it taste all the better. It's good, he acknowledges. Different, but good. Wilson nods, unsurprised. The public thinks so too. Our sales increase every year. People appreciate bread they can trust, made in conditions they can see. He gestures toward the large windows that allow passers-by to observe the baking process. No more hidden bakeries with who knows what going into the dough. After lunch, the training continues, moving from the basics of the machinery to the specifics of different products. The aerated bread company produces not just standard loaves, but also rolls, buns, and various fancy breads for their tea rooms. Each has its own requirements and techniques. By the end of the day, Thomas's head is swimming with new information, but his body feels remarkably good. No aching back from hours of kneading, no burning lungs from coal dust, no bone-deep exhaustion from fighting his body's natural need for sleep, just the normal tiredness of a day's honest work. As they prepare to leave, changing out of their white uniforms into their street clothes, Jimmy approaches Thomas with an expression of wonder. "It's still daylight," he says, gesturing toward the windows where late afternoon sunshine streams in. "We're done working and it's still daylight." The simple observation captures what is perhaps the most profound change in their new circumstances. They will go home in the light, sleep in the darkness, and return to work with the dawn, living in harmony with the natural rhythms of the world rather than in opposition to them. "That it is, lad," Thomas agrees, a smile spreading across his face. "That it is." The weeks that follow are a period of intense learning and adaptation. Thomas's skills as a traditional baker serve him well in some respects. He understands the properties of flour, the behavior of dough, the importance of temperature and timing, but he must unlearn many habits and assumptions, must trust machines to do work his hands have always done, must accept scientific principles in place of traditional practices passed down through generations. There are frustrations and setbacks. Thomas makes mistakes, misjudges settings, produces batches that must be discarded, but Mr. Carmichael is patient, Wilson is supportive, and gradually Thomas begins to master the new methods. Jimmy adapts more quickly, his youth and lack of ingrained habits making him more receptive to the modern approach. He takes to the machinery with natural aptitude, soon becoming adept at adjusting settings and troubleshooting minor problems. His thin frame fills out as regular meals, and reduced physical strain allow his body to recover from years of deprivation. The aerated bread company opens its doors to the public with considerable fanfare. Advertisements in local newspapers proclaim the purity and hygienic production of their bread. The large windows facing the street draw curious onlookers who stop to watch the bread being made, a deliberate contrast to the hidden, often basement bakeries of traditional establishments. The tea room, located at the front of the building, quickly becomes popular, especially with women who appreciate a respectable place to rest and refresh themselves while shopping or travelling. Thomas occasionally glimpses these customers through the doorway that connects the bakery to the tea room and is struck by how different they are from the working-class families who bought bread from his delivery cart at Middleton's. This observation leads to his first real concern about his new employer. For all its advantages, the clean conditions, the pure ingredients, the humane treatment of workers, the aerated bread company seems primarily focused on serving the middle classes, those who can afford to pay a premium for guaranteed purity and the luxury of tea room service. What of the factory workers, the labourers, the struggling families who had bought Middleton's bread because it was affordable, even if adulterated? Are they to be excluded from the benefits of progress? Thomas raises this question during a conversation with Wilson one afternoon as they monitor a batch of dough in the carbonating chamber. The company is expanding rapidly, Wilson assures him. As production increases and becomes more efficient, prices will decrease. It's the natural progression of industrial methods. What begins as a luxury for the few eventually becomes accessible to the many. Thomas isn't entirely convinced, but he acknowledges the logic. After all, many innovations, gaslighting, machine-made clothing, even tea itself, had once been luxuries for the wealthy and were now commonplace among all but the very poorest. Besides, Wilson adds, consider the broader impact. As companies like ours demonstrate the commercial viability of pure bread made in hygienic conditions, there will be increasing pressure on traditional bakeries to improve their practices. Already, there are calls for legislation to ban adulterants and regulate working conditions. This, Thomas realizes, is the true promise of the Industrial Revolution in baking, not just better conditions for a few bakers lucky enough to work at establishments like the Aerated Bread Company, but eventual improvement for all through a combination of technological innovation, market forces, and regulatory reform. One Sunday afternoon, about a month after starting his new position, Thomas takes the train to visit his mother and sisters in their small cottage on the outskirts of Birmingham. It's his first visit in nearly a year. The demands of night baking and his perpetual exhaustion had made such journeys all but impossible before. His mother hardly recognizes him at first. Gone is the hollow-eyed, flower-pale ghost who had visited last winter, snatching a few hours between shifts. In his place stands a man with colour in his cheeks, clarity in his eyes, and an energy she hasn't seen in him since he was a boy. "Thomas!" she exclaims, embracing him. "You look so well!" His sisters, Mary and Anne, crowd around him, exclaiming over the changes in his appearance. Mary, now working as a milliner's assistant, is a young woman of 20, while Anne, at 16, is still in school, a luxury made possible by Thomas's regular contributions to the family finances. Over a simple but pleasant meal, Thomas explains his new position, describing the Aerated Bread Company's methods and conditions. His mother listens with interest but limited comprehension. The technical details mean little to her, but the improvement in her son's health and spirits is evidence enough that the change has been for the better. "And the wages?" she asks eventually, the practical concern of a woman who has spent her life managing on too little. "You said they were less." "To start," Thomas confirms, "but I've already been promoted to assistant foreman of the morning shift, another shilling a week, and prospects for further advancement as I master the methods." He smiles reassuringly. "We won't go hungry, Mother, and I'll be able to work many more years this way than I would have at Middleton's." "That's what matters," she says firmly, "that you're well. The rest will follow." After the meal, Thomas walks with his sisters in the small garden behind the cottage. Mary tells him about her work at the milliner's, where she's beginning to learn the more skilled aspects of hat-making. Anne speaks excitedly about school, where she's shown a particular aptitude for arithmetic. "The teacher says I might become a clerk someday," she says, eyes bright with possibility. "In an office with a proper desk. Imagine that, Thomas." Thomas can imagine it, his little sister in a clean, respectable position, using her mind rather than wearing out her body in manual labour. It's the kind of future that had seemed impossible for children of their class not so long ago, but which now, in this rapidly changing world, begins to seem attainable. As the afternoon fades toward evening, Thomas prepares to return to the city. His train leaves at 6 and he needs to be in bed early to rise for his morning shift. Another luxury of his new life, the ability to plan, to maintain regular hours, to live without the constant disruption of switching between day and night. His mother walks with him to the small local station, her arm linked through his. "I worried about you," she confesses as they wait for the train. "When you wrote about those conditions, the coal dust, the long hours, I prayed every night that you'd find something better." "And so I have," Thomas says, squeezing her hand. "Thanks in part to your prayers, I suspect." She smiles, the lines around her eyes crinkling with genuine happiness. "Will you come again soon? The girls miss you. So do I." "I will," Thomas promises. "Every month if I can." It's easier now with regular hours and Sundays free. The train arrives, steam billowing around the platform. Thomas embraces his mother once more, then boards, finding a seat by the window where he can wave to her as the train pulls away. He watches her diminishing figure until the track curves and she's lost from sight, then settles back for the short journey to Birmingham. As the countryside gives way to the industrial outskirts of the city, Thomas reflects on how much his life has changed in just a few short months, from the grimy underground bakehouse of Middleton's to the clean, well-lit facilities of the aerated bread company, from a deadly night work to healthy day shifts, from adulterating bread with chalk and alum to producing pure, wholesome loaves that he's proud to see customers consume. The transformation in his personal circumstances mirrors the broader changes sweeping through British society in the latter half of the 19th century. Industrialization is bringing both challenges and opportunities, disrupting traditional trades but creating new possibilities for healthier work, more affordable goods, and improved quality of life. Of course, these benefits are not evenly distributed. For every baker like Thomas who finds employment in a modern facility like the aerated bread company, there are others still toiling in traditional bakeries, still breathing coal dust, still working through the night. For every customer enjoying pure bread in a clean tea room, there are families still consuming adulterated loaves because that's all they can afford. Progress is uneven, inconsistent, often unjust in its distribution of burdens and benefits, but it is progress nonetheless, a slow, halting movement toward better conditions, purer food, longer and healthier lives for working people. As the train pulls into Birmingham station, the gas lamps already lit against the gathering dusk, Thomas thinks of young Jimmy, now flourishing in the clean environment of the aerated bread company, of his sister Anne, dreaming of becoming a clerk, of the children he sees playing in the streets of Birmingham, who might grow up in a world where pure bread is the norm rather than the exception, where work doesn't necessarily mean premature death, where opportunities exist beyond the narrow confines of class and tradition. It's for them, ultimately, that the painful transitions of the industrial age are worthwhile for the generations to come, who will inherit a world transformed by steam and science, by machinery and medicine, by the gradual recognition that human health and dignity are not luxuries but essentials. Thomas makes his way through the busy station, past vendors selling evening newspapers and passengers hurrying to catch trains. The air is thick with coal smoke from the locomotives, a reminder that progress has its costs, environmental, social, personal. But as he walks toward his lodgings, he passes a small branch of the aerated bread company, its windows still lit, customers visible inside enjoying late refreshments in the clean, comfortable tea room. A sign in the window proclaims, "Pure bread, hygienically produced, no adulterants, no night baking." Thomas pauses, looking at the sign and the scene beyond it. In that moment, he feels a sense of pride in being part of this transformation, this slow but steady improvement in how bread, the staff of life, the most basic and essential of foods, is produced and consumed. Tomorrow morning he will rise with the sun, don his clean white uniform and take his place among the machinery of modern baking. He will produce bread that nourishes rather than harms, work in conditions that preserve rather than destroy health, and return home in the evening with energy enough to read, to write to his family, to plan for a future that now seems likely to extend well beyond the 42 years that was once the baker's expectation. It's a good life, Thomas reflects as he continues toward home, different from what he had imagined for himself, requiring adaptation and learning and the setting aside of old ways, but a good life nonetheless, and one that points toward an even better future. for bakers, for consumers, for all those who will benefit from the gradual, imperfect, but ultimately transformative progress of the industrial age. As night falls fully over Birmingham, the stars barely visible through the haze of factory smoke, Thomas Barrow, no longer the midnight baker, but the morning one, feels a sense of peace and possibility that has been absent from his life for too long. Whatever challenges tomorrow brings, he will face them in the light, breathing clean air, making pure bread, part of a world that is slowly, painfully, but undeniably changing for the better. And as you lie there, drifting towards sleep, perhaps you'll think differently about that loaf of bread in your kitchen. The story of how we make our daily bread has always been the story of us, our technologies, our values, our willingness to change. From the coal-fired ovens of Victorian bakeries to the modern factories of today, bread connects us to our past while nourishing our future. The struggles of Thomas Barrow and thousands like him, their labour, their suffering, their small victories, have made possible the world we inhabit now, where pure food is a right rather than a luxury, where work need not destroy health, where progress, however imperfect and uneven, continues to improve the lives of ordinary people in countless small but significant ways. That's something worth remembering as you close your eyes, as your breathing deepens, as you let go of the day's concerns and surrender to the healing embrace of sleep. The world is rarely transformed by grand gestures or heroic acts, but by the cumulative effect of individual choices. The decision of one baker to seek healthier work, of one company to produce purer bread, of one society to value human life over profit. Sweet dreams, and may your tomorrow be nourished by the best that both tradition and innovation have to offer.